Verti's Verbis podcast disclaimer: the information presented in this podcast is for entertainment, informational, and educational purposes only. It is not intended as legal, professional, or financial advice and should not be construed as such. Content and topics shown or discussed may not be accurate nor up-to-date information. Laws and regulations change frequently and vary by location, jurisdiction, and by nation. You should consult with a qualified legal or financial professional for advice specific to your situation. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not reflect the views of the podcast as a whole. The host is not responsible for any errors or omissions in the information provided or for any actions taken based on the content of this podcast. We are not liable for any losses, damages, or consequences arising from the use of this information. By listening to this podcast, you agree to hold the host and any guests harmless from any decisions you make, or from any losses, damages, or other claims arising from your use of this information.
All right, welcome back.
Hello.
I think today's topic is, I guess, of late, and it's not the first time we've seen something like this, but it seems to be relatively more prominent of the recent news, which is China's been printing money again.
Yeah. Well, they haven't printed in a long. They haven't printed in a long time, though, right? I mean, they relatively speaking, they haven't been on the news about printing as much as the U.S. has.
That's true. I kind of always get the feeling that they try to keep it on the down low. The last time I remember hearing about them printing, even then it was kind of like, it's not always reported, right? At least not in traditional media from my perspective. I only get wind of this stuff through, like, say on X, or more originally known as Twitter. But it was back when, the China housing market, I guess you can call it, with the Evergrande, which was one of their major real estate conglomerates or something like that. It was they were a huge market share, and supposedly, according to the articles, Evergrande obviously has their own vendors and other companies that they sublet out to for work, or contract out to for work, and those companies depend on Evergrande as well. So then there's this chain of companies, and I suspect, and from my understanding, or limited understanding, that a lot of companies don't often settle their not budget, but like their expenses or amounts owing, right? I forgot what it's called.
So from what I understand is they tend to borrow to build, right? They never really use their own cash flow. Right. And then what happens is they're already in debt when they are building the first, let's say, building, right? And then they would sell it. And then when they do sell it, they use that money to actually go and finance their next projects.
Right.
So it's never paid off, and they were always, I guess, also from my understanding, that they could keep doing that because the economy never slowed down, so they could then multiply faster.
Right. Yeah. Leveraging themselves to scale, right? To agree, and a lot of times, it was like pre-sale, right? So a lot of people, and then I from what I understand, the Chinese culture or community, they value housing as a store of wealth, largely, right? I mean, children need a place for them once they grow up. Their children grow up, they need a place for them so that they can get married in, right? So it's all planned in from a cultural aspect. And even then, even if it wasn't for the next generation, people still buy extra condos or whatnot to rent them out, to make money, or just to simply hold their wealth.
It's also a status symbol as well.
Of course. Yeah. And then to that degree, a lot of times these early pre-sales homeowners put down their deposit, and then the companies that are responsible for the real estate companies that are responsible for putting it together, they take it and, like as you said, they roll it forward and start the next building.
So they don't really settle their stuff,
right? And then a lot of people are left with homes that are basically unfinished, right? Missing electricity or plumbing. But sometimes I've heard stories about that.
They eventually, I mean, that was because I think they started to lose funding, and so then it left them, so they couldn't finish some of the projects because they were leveraged so much. But in most cases, I believe when the economy was good, they did finish. It's just that because when things go bad, they don't have enough funding then these things start to show, the cracks start to show up.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt when the economy was good, those buildings were finished, but I think it was more so when the economy wasn't doing, or when the cracks started to show, so to speak, is when we, or at least I saw a lot more reports on social media where there were basically empty apartment buildings where the people that bought the pre-sale, they just simply tried to live there anyways, but there's no water and there's no electricity. Like they have the shell, and that's basically all there is.
There was two parts to that, I believe. Like one is there's all these ghost towns, right?
Oh, that's
where the buildings are built, and oh man, there was a really good podcast I was listening to that talked about the ghost towns in China. So partly some of them were built because of the fact that they just each governance in each province of China has a certain way in power. So they could actually ask for funding depending on how much they spend or build. So some of them just build empty houses just for that fact. And then of course there's the other side, which is like the people that just want to invest. They don't care what building it is. They might not even be in their own province, right? And so to just buy somewhere, people saying that, oh yeah, this is a new upcoming city, invest here. There's like however many apartments being built. So then there's like all these buildings built, but then no one lives in them. That's I think that was one of the reasons. That was one of the reasons why there's a lot of those ghost town, brand new buildings that are built.
I think what, to your point, the incentive, right? Like when the budget comes and that area, state, province, or whatever they call it, gets a certain amount, like you don't spend it, then, and they know they have to spend it on housing, so they're just gonna build, right? They don't even care if there's any buyers. So there's that aspect of it. Fully agree. And then tying it back where Evergrande collapsed, or I don't know what happened to them. They went bankrupt or whatnot, and they basically major fallout. I don't even know what happened to them. I don't know if they're still around or not. But basically, a lot of people that the pre-sale owners, the ones that invested, they never got their houses. So basically, the money's gone. And Evergrande couldn't pay back all the other companies that they owed money to. And so those companies, if they were like on the lean side, then they started failing. And so it was a cascading effect, right? And it got to a point where, from what I read, China had to basically inject money into the housing economy to prop them up so that, there was at least something to kind of stop the cascading effect to some degree. That was what I recall, at least. Yeah.
So as of earlier this year, January, there was a report of the company trading on it was halted on the stock exchange in Hong Kong. And then the latest news, honestly, they stopped reporting on it, believe it or not, after after January 30th. I don't see anything else coming out from them. That's crazy, right?
It's like hush hush.
About it. Yeah. It's 10 months now from then. It's we're now recording in October, and the last news article when I go to Google to search was back in January 29th.
Yeah.
And it just talked about the illiquidness of Evergrande, and
and then just faded, right? Like no one,
and I don't see anything else.
Doesn't pop up. And then they bring, I guess, dialing it back to more recent. So I think it was like maybe a week or two ago, something like that, where all of a sudden there was indication that China's stock market was not doing well. And then there was a lot of hoopla on that, and then finally it was announced in multiple articles that China has injected, or basically they're printing money, right? So there's injecting into the into their M2 or whatever, monetary level, to basically, and then all of a sudden the as expected, I guess, and also kind of like, I don't know if it's like just funny or sad, but all of a sudden the stock market, the stocks shot up. Like there were news stories about exchanges being kept open 24/7 because the amount of demand from who knows whether it's people or I guess people closest to the money printer, they just simply needed to go in and buy stocks ASAP. That is kind of in a way like sad and funny. It's just bonkers. Like like you'd think that when the money gets injected, it's injected in some more maybe formal process, but instead it's like retail that's rushing. And that could possibly be because maybe retail knows that there's money being injected, so they all want to get in on the trade. That might be a possibility. It's not to say that they got the money already, right? It's more so that they're aware.
Yeah, like they know that the only thing, like probably, right? Because that's what happened in the US when they started printing money. It's that when they have an excess supply of funds, people know that it's going to lose value, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to park it in something that would probably maintain its value, and that's usually like corporations. If you can't buy real estate because of what's the situation happening with Evergrande, then they might as well park it into companies that can generate value, right? And it's not even that they do generate value; it's the fact that they think it will generate value. Then everyone else starts to think that it will generate value, so everyone else starts throwing money into the stock market, and it's just like a cycle, like a vicious cycle, like.
That herd mentality. Yeah.
If stocks going up, is a good thing, which in most cases it is, then it's technically not bad. But when it's artificial,
exactly,
there could be a bubble and all those kind of things.
Yeah, it's not like one or two companies discovered something new or created something revolutionary, right? It's just all stocks. From what I understood, it just basically everything went up. So it's just kind of bonkers, right? I'm sure there's some that went up more than others, but just the general sentiment and the general market in I guess in aggregate went up. It spiked upwards, like massive candles, green candles shooting up, which is crazy. Yeah.
What was that saying? A rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly. And then there's another thing. Even before that news, like maybe 1 or 2 months back, I was asking, I think 1 or 2 friends of mine that live over in Asia, and I was asking them like, well, now that housing doesn't seem to be like, I mean, at least in China, right? It doesn't seem to be as safe, so to speak. And then, of course, then the stocks, the way, from what I read, the Chinese government has their hand in everything, right? So every company has like some state level person that sits in on their board or something like that, just to make sure everything aligns with the way the government wants it. So, there was that well, can't really invest in housing, right? It doesn't that's risky. Can't really invest in stocks because look what happened to Jack Ma and was it Alibaba or whatever, where he got disappeared for a while, and then he reappeared. That was the scariest part, right? And of course he obviously said something that the Chinese government didn't like. So then the sentiment from, at least from my 2 friends, were, well, it doesn't seem like there's anything worthwhile to invest because they both seem risky, right? And so I think from their perspective, and obviously I got to put up the not financial advice caption on the screen, they probably are, I don't know what they're investing in, to be honest, but like I suspect from my discussions with them that they're probably focused more on the considered safer stuff, which is like maybe North American stocks.
So they're still investing into like the maybe US stock market or something.
Yeah, because you got to invest in something. You can't just not invest, right? We know that for a fact. So yeah, there's a little bit of that, and then also resuming back to more current. Because of, this is before the injection, or even after the injection of liquidity from China's central bank. There was news that at least in Hong Kong, right? I'm sure other places as well in China, but specifically Hong Kong. The article was about Hong Kong, where a lot of the retail shops were closing. Like they're basically right. There was articles on that, and I asked my 2 friends, and I was like, is this real? Because like the picture shown in the article looks really exaggerated. Like literally all the shops on the ground floor were all closed out, right? And the article is basically detailing out like this is happening all over. And I asked my friends, I was like, is this legit, right? Because sometimes you just don't know, and they're like, yeah, it is like that. And I was like, wow. And then one of my friends told me, well, The interesting thing is, yeah, like all those shops are closing, but at the same time, there was news about, I guess, a very rich family went and bought like a number of properties on a very pristine area in Hong Kong. Just went and snatched it up because they were on sale. And so there's that contrast where the rich aren't affected, right? To them, it's like, oh, it's buying season, it's discount, right? But for the people that are struggling, like more,
it's tough. I think partly, and I was actually asking one of my friends that he doesn't live there anymore, but I think he went back during that time when you saw those articles about the shops closing up.
Oh, okay.
And he also told me that there are some that are in that situation, but people are still out and about. People are still living their lives, going out to eat, shopping, buying things, and so forth. Because the economy is still running. So I mean, it's so hard these days with the news being the way it is. You really don't know how much of it is like true.
Right.
Some of it could be, and there's both sides that kind of want to have their say, right? If the economy was bad, then it might make, I don't know, let's say for example, the United States look good, right? And then when the economy is good, then of course maybe China is involved. There's just always, multiple angles that they want to put it. But yes, speaking to your point about people buying in, and when they're wealthy, that's usually what happens. The wealthy usually gets wealthier during these times, right? If they feel like it's not a big investment on their part, but they're buying something on a discount now, they have the means to do so, they will. And so that when the time does come back and they eventually will need these places, especially the places that are, there's not many of them, right? Like if they're buying really expensive stuff, it's rare, right?
Yeah.
So no matter, if you have if you're one of 10,000 units in an apartment, then of course like it don't really matter if you buy another one or not, because like if that building goes, it goes. But if you have some prime real estate that overlooks the water or the forest or whatever, then it's like you're still dealing with
limited quantity. Yeah.
What was that time? I don't want to bring in politics, but what was that time when I think it was Trump that said he was going to give a horse to some lawyer to pay for its legal fees?
Really? I think I missed that one.
So this is a while back because I think something about he couldn't pay his legal fees.
Oh.
But the thing is, it's crazy because like in the more wealthier part of the world, people trade and deal with things that are that to you and me, it makes no sense. Like, what are you going to give me a horse for? But in their eyes, if it's like a racing horse or a breeding horse, it's worth millions of dollars.
Exactly.
Right.
Something you can't buy.
It's just one of those things. It's like for them, like their change in value from one really valuable asset to another really valuable asset, a small percentage already makes a huge amount of money for them. So why not make that purchase, right?
That's true.
But then how likely is it going to go down? Probably not, because there's a lot of people that are looking for that same asset.
Oh yeah,
like and in their class.
Of course, and it sure as hell beats keeping it in China yuan, right? Like that's being printed, right? So if you've got a whole bunch of cash sitting on the sidelines in your accounts, go buy some property, right? Like makes sense.
It's also it might not just be China too. Like I think other countries ultra wealthy do the same thing as well.
Sure, yeah.
So it definitely can happen anywhere that where a big major amount of wealth is gathered together.
And then that reminds me again of a friend that we both know, where for context, this particular friend is in the financial industry, and his perspective that he shared with us was that he didn't believe China would print. And I think he was quite adamant about it. Like he had some strong beliefs that, based on Xi Jinping's vision or direction, it just wasn't in the cards. I mean, that was his, crystal ball type of like, this is what I think, right? And that's fair, right? But over time, and this was probably said like, at least at least a year or two ago. I mean, we had that conversation, and that conversation pops up every now and then. But what I've noticed over time is every single time there's these articles or on social media where there's news about China printing, it always reminds me of that conversation that we had where his perspective was that from a CCP government perspective, they're just not into that. And then from my own perspective, I always had my doubts because, especially regardless of whether China's communist or not, they've gone to a point where they're kind of like communist / capitalist, right? They've basically bolstered their company to basically replicate, I guess a democratic type of economy, but run by communist governance. So they definitely see the benefit of having companies and stock markets and all those things that are beneficial to, I guess, their GDP or whatnot. And for me to like think that like if all of their stuff runs on money the same way it does in, say, North America or in Europe, why wouldn't they print if they can in order to bolster or save their economy from something, right? Like, to me, it made sense. But yeah, you go ahead.
So going back, so why did our mutual friend have such strong ideas of printing would not happen in China? Was it said? I can't remember.
He mentioned that supposedly Xi Jinping's background isn't in finance or economics, and hence his belief, and plus the fact that Xi's a directive is to basically reunify China, right? Where part of that is, hey, Taiwan, their belief is Taiwan belongs to China. And so the focus or the vision of Xi was to basically bring those pieces back into the fold, right?
Right.
So that was his explained perspective of what he thought Xi's vision is, right? And I don't refute that part. I think I agree with that piece. But it's just that I think that's what led into where he thought that's one of the core reasons or strong beliefs.
Yeah. So what do you think changed the mindset of China for printing money now then?
I just simply think that because they got to a point where, again, they're communist as a whole, but they've become capitalists, right? So there's just no way they can get away with not printing, especially when their whole economy depends on the liquidity of money. They can't just simply have things fail, right? I mean, yes, I think our friend's perspective was she would just watch things, let them fail, right? Because the things that fail, those companies deserve it. But it's not that simple. Like, let's say that was Xi's directive or perspective. I'm sure he has many advisors telling him, you can't do that. Like, if you do, there's going to be no government left, right? Like, it's all going to fall apart. Do you want to go back to the olden days where it's like totally just crazy, right? And she doesn't want that, right?
So here's a question.
Yeah,
here's a question. So so that's all fine and good. We know that maybe it's inevitable that he has to do the printing. But was there a way for them to do it without announcing it whatsoever? Like, I know some of the information came through X, formerly known as Twitter, for people reporting it, but in this case, he was just printing the money. I'm sure he was printing it in a way where he was injecting it into companies, using it for something, right? Would it have been impossible, you think, for him to hide, or
that's
China
a good
as a whole
question.
to hide it?
Yeah, like why? Like, that's a great question. Like, I think to your point, right? Like, why can't they just inject it but not let anyone know? Because since they have all the power, they're communists. They're not democratic. So what reason do they have to be transparent about it?
Oh, theory. Maybe maybe they were thinking that they do need to let people know because they need to let people know that they have stability now. Because printing of money
Mm.
means that they are in a way in control and not afraid of adding what is needed to make their
Oh,
economy work.
like
So
using.
maybe that's why they do need to let it out there know that they are, because otherwise, no matter how much money they inject, it won't
You're
do anything.
right, because no one knows. So the whole point of the
Yeah,
tool is, I see your point, right? So the tool is to let people know. So they might not even have to inject that much then potentially, because everyone's
that's
just
right.
rushing into putting their money into the
Yeah,
stocks, which then course corrects for them to a degree. So maybe they can ease back a little bit on what they would have had to inject if they didn't say anything about it. Yeah, I
exactly.
get your point.
They can just say they put it in X amount of yuan into the market when they don't actually have to have done it because everything else would still drive the mentality of people to act as the way they would do if it did happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very good point actually.
And
That
it's
is a good
just a
point.
theory. I mean, I
That
don't
makes
know.
sense.
I mean, it's anyone's guess at this point.
Right.
um, so yeah, so back to our friend, mutual friend about his statement in there. I mean, I know he definitely has a lot of um insight, in the marketplace. He's deeply, his profession is very closely tied to um financial sector, so he definitely has a lot of knowledge that we don't have. And in that situation, I do listen to a lot of things that he has to say, and it might have been. I don't think he was. I can't say he was wrong. I mean,
No,
it's just that in terms of how things turn out, no one really knows. And
absolutely. Yeah.
and I'm sure now there's probably a different narrative that they're taking that would make sense to why they had to do what they had to do. I
Sure.
mean, the
Sure.
easiest one I could think of is like, well, advisors, like you said, have weighed in and now has proven otherwise. So we're going to take the next better course, which is to print money, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then that's it. And then that's how you just escape that type of because there's no resistance, right? There's no one's going to
Oh
come out and
no.
say like, well, you said this, well, why are you doing that now, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
there is nobody, no one's going to come out and say any of that, that
No.
type of thing.
No.
So they're
Quite
in the
the
clear.
opposite too, right? You basically help stop the world from collapsing, or their
Yeah,
part of the world. And
right,
you're
right.
right, like no one's gonna hit you when you pass out money. Like no one realizes that the printing of money is gonna cause them more issues down the road. But that's for the next generation potentially, right? No one
Hmm.
gives two shakes about that. So it's all
Yeah,
about the now and how do we prosper now, or how do we continue our lifestyle. No one wants to go backwards. And so that's why money printing is never seen as a negative, I guess, in the general populace. Because for one thing, they're not even educated, right? So to them,
yeah.
printing, they're not asking where the money's coming from. All they care is that their
Mhm.
government is taking care of them. And that's in the form of doling out money, injecting it in the
Is
right places. That's how they would probably think of it, right? But they're not.
isn't it fun? Oh,
Mhm.
sorry.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No, isn't it funny how in the United States, no matter what the politicians do, there's always someone that's hating, and then in China, no matter what you do, no one's can hate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are critics. I mean, no matter, I
There
mean,
are,
it doesn't matter
but
which side of the fence. There's always going to be a critic, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
As the saying goes. Um,
yeah,
you're right. But again, same point too is that because China's a communist country, you're not
yeah.
going to go and run your mouth off, especially when they have
Exactly,
a credit
exactly.
score on your butt. And
Yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah,
not going to be, oh, you said something bad about the country, throw you in jail, or they don't even have to.
yeah,
They just say, hey, we're just going to reduce your credit score so you can't even buy food,
yeah. That's
right?
right.
Like you're automatically gonna censor yourself. Whereas
True.
in the Western society, it's all about free speech, right? That's
Hmm.
that's that's the that's the key thing, and everyone has the right to say whatever they want, and that
Yeah.
includes lambasting the government and calling them out, right? So it's a very
Yeah.
different from a cultural and also from a governmental perspective, right? Like,
True. True. Yeah.
but yeah.
The culture is different, bar none.
Mm,
Um. Yeah. Anything else that we want to touch base on? I mean, you you did mention about um,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
what was
Yeah.
it? I mean, and in terms of this topic wise, it's kind of like where it is, right? I mean, there's no other thing. It's just that right now, what's going to happen to the economy, to the rest of the world's economy, when China decides to print the money, I guess.
Yeah. So ultimately, I think for folks that are studying Bitcoin or looking into it, it's Bitcoin's, the whole point of the 21 million cap on Bitcoin is that's how much there is. There's no way to change that. Definitely not easily. And because of that fact is Bitcoin one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, as they say, right? Or one Satoshi is one Satoshi. That's not changing. So what's actually changing is how people value Bitcoin through their local currency, right? So that's why, say in Australia, they'll have a certain value for it, and for their local exchanges. In the States, in USA, they'll have a certain USD value for Bitcoin. In Zimbabwe, in Africa, they'll have it in their currency. Everybody's currency is different, so everybody gives it a different value. But ultimately, Bitcoin doesn't change, right? And so that basically Bitcoin becomes a non-moving goalpost, or it's basically a metric, right? It says there's only so many. Therefore, if a country's currency were to change in volume, as in inflate, then that is immediately reflected in their local valuation of what Bitcoin is worth. Right. So that's why we see these spikes in Bitcoin value. It's not because Bitcoin has changed. Quite the opposite. It hasn't changed. And it's because of the fact that it's staying put and it's not moving or changing, where everything else around it that is fiat is changing. And that makes everyone think from a perspective like, wow, my Bitcoin is going up in value. It's not. Quite the opposite. It's the same thing as housing. You look at a house, the house hasn't changed. It doesn't have any more extra doors or windows. The structure is absolutely the same. You're talking about potentially a 30-year-old, 40-year-old house, but the value went up. Well, what exactly happened here? Right? Like, it's not like you added a basement or a swimming pool. No, it's the exact same house 30, 40 years ago, but the value just spiked. So again, it's that same reflection on how the money, like most folks don't understand, is it's the money that's inflating. It's like a swimming pool filling. All the pool noodles and all the flotation devices or beach balls are floating up. Everyone's happy because everything's higher now. But what they're not seeing is it's because the water's coming up.
Yeah. So it's basically like, it's also like saying like everyone still wants it just as much, but everyone now has more money to throw at it. So then then of course the prices got to go up, right? Because the demand, so the supply isn't changing, and demand is still relatively kept the same. Let's say, for example,
right.
Then like the price in this, well, that's not true. The demand is. Can you say demand is still staying the same though? I mean, theory,
you can assume the demand stayed the same, right? But let's change it. For example, let's say it's a stick of butter. We know butter's not limited, but let's say the shipping the shipping company can't ship out the next shipment of butter to the store until a month later. Well, then whatever is left in the store is gonna potentially be worth a lot more until that next shipment comes in, right? And so you can think of the next shipment as the next halving, so to speak. But Bitcoin works in reverse. It doesn't give you the same amount every halving. It gives you half that amount. So it forces that scarcity, right? So for the butter that's left in the store, obviously the people with money are going to be able to buy it, right? And so the store, if it was a free market, they would say, wow, we only have 5 sticks of butter left. We're going to jack up the price because now everybody's showing up with more money. That automatically says to the store owner that, something's going on. I don't know why our butter's flying off the shelves, but at this rate, we only got 5 sticks left. Maybe we should jack the price up. Right? Because it's flying off the shelves too fast. Something's not right. So let's jack the price up just to see what happens. Once they do that, then you start seeing who's really got extra money. because then only people that have a lot more money can then afford those sticks of butter, right? So I think conceptually it's probably somewhat similar, where there's only a certain amount of Bitcoin on exchanges, right? On each of the exchanges globally. And for those folks that are local to those exchanges, it's their store, and they're going to go in and buy it. Now, obviously, sure, there will be miners that will sell. But again, it's like, are the miners selling, right? If they're not ready to sell, or if they don't need to, then there's going to be no new Bitcoin coming onto the exchanges. So then, right, same thing as no more butter until later. So then if there's still the same amount of people asking for butter, well, then the price is going to go up, because the exchange is not a supermarket. It is an exchange, and it goes by the lowest ask or lowest bid, right? And that bid's going to keep climbing, because if people want it and there's only that much, then they're going to pay more.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think back to the whole supply and demand graph, right?
Yeah.
And where the price changes depending on the supply and demand. So just kind of going back to what we were saying just before, I was kind of making sense of it. Like the demand is definitely changing. I mean, there has to be. I mean, you can also see supply is also going down as well too, because like you said, there's less and less of it being put out there, right? So in essence, it is kind of a change in supply, but that's gradual, right? That one everyone can see, that one everyone knows. But you're right. Like in some countries where there's more inflation or there's hyperinflation, their money to buy Bitcoin is becoming less and less.
Right.
And versus like other other countries where they're able to print money, they may have more money in excess at the current time to buy Bitcoin. So also pushing, of course, the demand higher for it as well too.
Right.
And they're willing to put in that price. And that difference in price, called disparity, I think maybe, will then lead to basically the fluctuations of prices going up and down as much as they are. I believe. I mean, once again, I'm not an economist. I'm just trying to think back to what knowledge I have about the market and how it works.
Absolutely.
And kind of just trying to apply that to how Bitcoin may be reacting in these situations.
And two more points, right? In line with what you're saying is, one, there's one or more websites out there that track new all-time highs in all the, I don't know, there's like 150 some odd plus different currencies, right? So it's always the countries with the weakest currency that reach all-time highs first. And the second point is, we have to keep in mind that with all these exchanges around the world that are buying and selling Bitcoin, there are arb traders, right? People that are like buying it cheap in one location, taking the Bitcoin and putting on into another market in another location and selling it for higher. Why? Because Bitcoin doesn't move itself, right? The exchanges, in theory, aren't going to be passing it to each other, right? So when there is low liquidity on an exchange, then there's going to be more demand. And then someone, could be a trader, could be whatever, they recognize that, oh, it's low in supply over here. I'm going to buy it for cheap over here where it's abundant. Maybe it's on Coinbase, has a lot, and move it over to somewhere in Korea, right? Where South Korea's exchange is low. I think that's what happened with Sam Bankman-Fried, right? With the FTX, where he made a lot of his initial money by doing the arb trade. Well, among other things, I guess it was crypto, but I suspect primarily it was Bitcoin, right? Between Korea and wherever else, probably the States or something.
Yeah. I think I remember hearing something about that as well too. Yeah, it definitely is one of the ways, if you're tuned into the market, to kind of capitalize on the differences there to make money out of it.
And it happens with everything, any type of commodity, right? Whether it's wheat or corn or whatever. Like one market has a high demand, another market has a saturated surplus. Trader's going to trade it to balance it out. That's why the markets eventually balance out, but not immediately, right? And it's people jumping in to make those trades. At least that's my understanding.
Yep, that makes sense to me. It's just one of those type of situations where it kind of happens. Yeah, I mean, this is the way the market's going to be. But when things settle, we'll have a better idea of where things are going. I mean, it's too hard to kind of, I mean, everyone's going to be out there right now still predicting this and that. Usually with a pump in the market like this right now, people are very, the greed index is going to be pretty high or higher, I guess, from the fear. And you know, it'll just kind of have to taper out and see. Because with these type of things, yeah, there's just so much things going on right now, like in the world, that just never ends in terms of like what's going to change the market to go another part. Sort of an aside, but like, you know, with the war and stuff going on in other parts of the world, it's funny. It was just looking at stocks and trades and stuff like that. It's like what everything was, you know, going down for a good reason. There's fear when there's war. Everything was going down. But some companies did go up, and I was just kind of interested and intrigued looking at them. I'm not going to name any names because it doesn't really matter. Because once again, not financial advice. But then I looked into it and remember, oh yeah, I remember why this company's going up right now, because it supplies military tech.
Right. Exactly.
So it just shows you like there's always something somewhere that people are investing in.
Yeah,
right?
basically, right. The money's flowing to different places, right? That's there was I don't know if you saw, I think I just only got a little bit of that news where I think you might have been aware in the States there was I think even in Canada, from what I read, where there was lots of ports that were going on strike because they were all part of the same union, if I understand correctly.
I didn't catch that one.
You didn't catch that one. And so there was a lot of, it wasn't a lot, but there was a bit of run up where the union leader, and there's a really awesome video of him floating around where he comes across like he's like a gangster boss talking about, you know, his crew and how they're gonna get what they deserve because they're the ones that are, you know, doing the work, rightly so.
Interesting.
And there was comparisons being made to back in the day when, I guess, during major events, I think, I'm not sure if it was the recession or whatnot, where again, when the money printer starts, and then a lot of the people that are on the ground that are doing this type of work or service, they will, specifically the unions too, they will downright go on strike and ask for more money because they see it happening, and they're like, well, we're not going to do the same job if you're going to pay us the same amount if everyone else is getting more, right? And so they're saying this has been seen before. But what's interesting was the recent port strike. They were only on strike for 1 day, and then it was settled the next day. And there was a lot of concern leading up because the news was saying, wow, if this happens, no one's going to be getting their, like, you name it, shipments from China or, you know, food supplies. Everything comes through the ports, right? So that union leader basically said, I think he said something along the lines of, watch me cripple your economy or something. And it was that video was hilarious. I would recommend anyone go look that up. The way he worded things was so strong. And it got settled the next day. There was some news about Biden coming out saying something about like, not a problem. Everything's all good now. And so that would have been a black swan event, right? Like, because if those ports got crippled, North America would have been in pretty big trouble. But see, again, it goes to show, like, stuff like that, they're not going to let it happen, right? Because it's just bonkers. The whole world or North America would go into chaos overnight. So when that happens, they can't let that happen. So they're going to immediately settle. And so how are they going to settle that? Well, they're going to agree to their terms. The
terms.
And pay them more money. And here's the thing, right? Like, people were showing these automated systems in China. People just love posting contrarian things. Automated systems in China with these automated, it looked like Amazon, but basically with like big semis that were automated with no driver. And they were moving the containers back and forth in China. And then there's a bunch of these, like, they look like students, and each student had like a big, awesome computer set up with 2 joysticks. And instead of sitting inside the cranes and whatnot.
I did see that. I did see that one. Yeah.
It showed them, they looked like they were in a classroom, and there was like some teacher or support person walking around giving them advice, and the kids were basically doing all the loading, unloading through the automated system. And how true is that? I don't know, right? It's just a video. But it's just funny how people always find something to contradict, because the key point was the people that are in North America doing the port work, they're it's manual, right? They're the ones operating the cranes. They're the ones that are driving the semis, moving the containers back and forth. And then one of the biggest parts of their contract was no automation, guaranteed no automation in their field. And that makes sense because if you're a taxi driver, you don't want AI coming in driving all the taxis, right?
Yeah.
Same concept. If you're doing the port work, you don't want AI semis removing all the semi truck drivers. You don't want AI crane. You don't want some student to be able to do your job, right? And they make good money because it's specialized.
Is that still considered AI then? If there was someone remotely operating, because I think the video I saw was like basically I think a really experienced heavy machinery operator was able to do it from the comfort of their own home. Because if they had all the same monitors, same sizes, they're able to, and the same controls set up at home, they technically can remotely pilot the thing safely.
Yeah, absolutely. The one I saw was basically a classroom, looked like a bunch of classroom of like
I didn't see that one
Chinese.
That's pretty,
they look like really young adults, like almost like students. And so that's why it was funny, right? Because it's like, oh wow. And it actually showed them controlling, and you're right, you could do it at home, literally, because it has all the cameras pointing in the right directions and they can control the equipment. But the
that's
point,
interesting. I was just wondering. I was wondering if that actually makes it still considered AI operation. Probably not, because still have human back there.
But they did show in the video I saw. They did show a lot of, you know how Amazons have those robots that move the packages to certain locations automatically.
Yeah,
they were showing automated semi truck beds with no cab, moving containers around automatically, like in theory automatically. No one really knows, but it was basically gave you the feeling that as if you were looking at Amazon but outdoors with a bunch of shipping containers instead of Amazon packages. And
here's another take on it.
Yeah.
Would it still be considered, like, because the art, like you bring up a really good interesting topic, which is like, is this considered AI, especially the fact that I know China's version is right, but
not AI, but automation. Let's change that wording. Maybe I used the wrong word.
Not AI. No. I think I heard wrong. So automation, right? So let's put it this way: what if there was a situation where, like a real-time strategy game, like StarCraft or Warcraft, whatever, right? Where there's some automation, so basically you can tell a drone to go from point A to point B and start working. But there's an overseer, overlord, which is a human, which would then be like seeing like, oh, okay, these 10 cargo containers need to be shipped over there, and I'm gonna just drag my mouse and select 10 trucks and tell them to go pick it up. Now, see, how much of that is then automation? I mean, there is obviously, but then it's still operated by one human being.
But that's the point, though, right? Like you're basically replacing all the people that are on deck or on the ground with drones or automatons, right? You could do that with farming too. You imagine in the future, the farmer sits in his house or whatever, sends out the drones, and you're right, click, drag, group a bunch of drones, tell them to go and harvest the wheat in that corner. And then tell them to load it into the containers, and the trucks are all automated, right? Like the AI probably comes in where the drones are doing it by simple click and point, right? But in terms of, you're right, the overseer aspect, like that's basically what technology does, is it elevates the role of the person that used to be doing it hands-on to an overseer level. But the decrease is in the number of human beings you need at the ground level, because that's replaced by the technology. And the only time where you need a overseer that potentially is human would be that person that's elevated to look after. Arguably, if the AI was good enough, you wouldn't even need a human overseer. You would have an AI doing the overseeing, and then one further level above, you would have a human that looked after multiple AIs that was doing the overseeing.
Yeah, it was just the fact that you brought up how the union was arguing for or against automation, right? But it just really really comes down to semantics sometimes, I feel like, because your vehicle, even though it's operated by, let's say that we're not replacing any humans right now, but the fact that just your current vehicle you buy off a car sales lot has so much tech in it already. It's like who's to say that's not automation? You know what I mean? Because it's already comes to a point where the car can drive itself. Even though, yes, you do need someone to pilot it, So I think the argument may be like, do not cut the amount of workers we need
exactly
to do the same task.
That's they're saying it in a roundabout way, right? Is like do not reduce headcount, right? You must keep the headcount. To say we don't care what you do. If you put in an automation system, I'm obviously putting words in their mouths. That's not what they're saying, but I'm imagining, right, that they'll say, hey, even if you put in automation, you're still gonna have to pay us for the fixed number of headcounts. You can't lay us off.
I think
right?
That's what it is.
So then the incentive to automate would be less, because now the company or whatever it is that has that owns the ports, or the government or whatever, they're not going to go and spend money automating. Because why? Because they know that they'll still have to pay these people to sit around. So it's
you can't replace them all
disincentivizing.
at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah, unless you do. But until technology comes to a point where it's like, it don't matter if they strike or threaten, they can just replace everyone in one go. Then of course, then it becomes a different story. I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought was interesting. And then I saw another
very interesting. Yeah.
I saw another clip, and I'm not sure how real it is because I only saw one post on X or Twitter where maybe it's fake, but it was like something about like the war in Ukraine is over, and I'm like, what? It can't be right. Like, because they were the post was making fun of, they stated two things, right? It was one post, but like one picture cut in half. Top half was port strike resolved, and then the bottom half was war in Ukraine is over, and then the caption was, oh, looks like these black swan events are no longer an issue, or something like that. I'm like, what? So I know about the port one being resolved. I don't know about Ukraine having stopped. So I was kind of like, it just kind of piqued my interest. I'm like, really? Is this real, or is this again someone just making jokes, or a meme or something, right? Half truths, maybe. I don't know.
That's weird.
But that's hilarious, because I guess the tie-in was like, these were the things that were potentially holding the market back, right? Ongoing war, and now there's a new one, a strike, port strike, now cripple the economy. Well, how can your stock market do well? Oh, all of a sudden it's all fixed. Now the stock market can continue to party. And I think that was the joke, but at the same time, I was like,
crazy.
I didn't know which part was
how these things work. Yeah,
exactly. Like the truth behind it was kind of, it kept me wondering.
Yeah. All right. I guess we can end it there. I mean,
that's
pretty much covered a couple of good topics.
Let's wrap it there. All right, cool.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.